In this episode, we're going to try something different. We're going to take an existing effect and pull it apart to see how it was done. Hey, and welcome back to Teaching After Effects. I'm in the controlling seat today because actually what we're going to do is take this shot from Aespa's Next Level video, which seems to have sort of been latched onto by a big chunk of the internet.
Well, it's really cool.
So we have the human figure and they then morph into the avatar figure in the next couple of frames. First thing that occurs to me that we need is a shot that we can use to swap somebody in. And then we need a CG character to drop in its place.
Yeah.
So what I've done is I've got another comp here and I've got a jump cut set up where we have a character and they freeze the action, he disappears and then his two companions react to it. Mm-hmm. So it's not the same as a dance video, but it's something that we had on hand that we could use, and thanks to Jeff Smith for letting me use all of his footage for this stuff. So yeah, we've got our character and then he drops out. And what I've already done is I've taken our central guy and I've masked around him. This is just a bit of prep work. We covered that in the masking video.
Okay.
So, the reason I've isolated him from the background is that because we want any transition effect we put on him to just be on him and not on the whole screen.
Okay.
So we'll be doing that on there. Let's go and find a comedy character to pop in place. I'm going to use Mixamo for this. I've already talked about that in another tutorial, which you'll find a link in the description to. But we can now select a character and then we can apply an animation. So there are a whole bunch of dance moves in here if you're using it for a dance video. Our guy's drinking. So I guess we need to find a character and then see if there's any animations around drinking.
Okay. Maybe not that one.
We need something scary because they react in horror. So I'm thinking mutant. And he immediately stops being scary when you do a cute dance like that. Oh, so let's go over to animations and let's see if we've got anything that looks like he's drinking. Oh, and look at this first one. Well, he's stabbing himself. Now, our guy, if I jump back to After Effects, he's holding it in his right hand. So, but that's okay because we've got the mirror option here.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Now, you can mess with the intensity so we can get sort of a larger reaction and the speed and the character arm space and things like that. When we're happy with what we're doing,
yeah, that's better.
What we'll need to do is we'll need to download it. We'll then have to put this into Blender in order to convert it into an OBJ sequence, which we can then import into Video Copilot Element, which I know is frustrating, but if you want to do character animation inside After Effects, then pretty much the only option is Video Copilot Element. If I now flash forward, here's my character, and if I pop him on with the whole thing in shot, pops into existence behind the other guy disappears out, and then he takes a swig, which freaks out his two companions, who run off. Now, again, what would be really good and sensible, and if we had more time on this, is that we would take this guy and cut him out using a mask and have him so that the CG character is behind him, but in front of the wall. I'm not going to bother doing that for this shot because that's replicating the entirety for this shot, and I'm guessing if you're watching this, you're more interested in the process of working out how to do an effect rather than how to do this exact shot. Mm-hmm. What we've now got is this jump cut. He jumps in, he jumps out. If I go back to the next level clip, there's a noise going on, and there's a blockness going on too. What occurs to me to do this is this feels like I could use a blocky noise with a gradient wipe, and that would give me the option for altering the size and the scale of the noise, and also then using a wipe to do that. So what I mean by that is if I go back to our comp here, and I'll go to the start of where I want the effect to be, I'll turn off our monster for the moment, and I'm going to go Layer, New, Solid, make sure that I've got a comp size solid and click OK. And now if I solo that for the moment, I'm going to go up to Effect, Noise and Grain, Fractal Noise. And Fractal Noise is a really cool effect. It's the base for so many effects in After Effects, and it allows you to do a lot, because what it does is it gives you a nice organic texture that you can work on, and you can use it. If I switch it from basic temporarily to dynamic, I've immediately got like a big old smoky thing going on. If I invert that, I've got an electrical field type thing going on. I can do lots and lots with it. But just in basic alone, if I go to where it says noise type soft linear, and I change that to block, I get all these squares. I get this blockiness. It's almost like digital static, which feels like it's close to what we're seeing in that Aespa video. It's not quite right. I want to go into transform, and I'm going to uncheck uniform scaling. I want to make it wider because it feels like there's a lot of sort of streaks and blocks of width, and maybe a little narrower. And this is just playing around. So what I want to do is set a keyframe for my evolution, and if I go to the end of where I want the effect to be, and then I can just twirl this around. Maybe we'll go a full 2 lots. And if I play that back, we get like a really noisy bit of noise, and then it stops because we get to the end of the keyframe.
So if you didn't have evolution, it would just be still.
It would be that for the whole way through.
Okay.
I'll hit U to expose the keyframes I've set, and go back to the first one, and we'll trim the effect to there because that's all we want and care about. So now that I've got that, I'm going to drag it to the bottom. I'll unsolo it, I'll turn it off, and I'll padlock it. So it's just going to sit there. I now can't affect it in any way, but I've got that to begin with. So if I now go back up to Guy and go to Effect, Transition, and I've got loads of different transition options here. What I'm going to go with is Gradient Wipe, which gives me the ability to wipe out parts of an image based on the darker parts of a gradient that's applied.
So it's going to start with the black and then go up to the white.
Yeah. So if I drop it in halfway through, I'll set my transition completeness to 50%. It's picking up because I've set the guy to be the gradient layer, or it has because I haven't changed it. It's wiped out the darker parts of him.
Okay.
Which is not what we want. We want to use our noise that we've just created, which was on grey solid 3. But it's picked up just the grey solid. What I wanted to do is pick up the fractal noise, and I can do that by going to Source, Effects and Masks. Suddenly, we're getting quite close to that look already.
So it still thinks that it's grey because that's just kind of put on top of it.
Exactly.
Oh, I suppose you wouldn't want to apply that then. No, because you don't need to, because you can put effects and masks.
Yes. And the other thing you can do is I could turn grey solid. If I right click on it, I could pre-compose it. So I could actually separate it out from this composition and have it be its own composition. So I could add even more effects and do all sorts of things and clever, interesting stuff with it as a separate composition. And then it would still be inside this one, and I could use that.
Right.
And if I was to do that, I wouldn't need to use effects and masks because everything would be on inside that other composition. Anyway, so that you can see what's happening here. Here we go. There's this big dark square, and he's been completely removed from that big dark square. But there's a white block here, and you can see him within there. So we get this look. So that's pretty close. We need to keyframe the transition because right now I just set it to 50. So we'll start, holding shift, I'll snap to the front. We'll start it at 0%. And then I'll go to the end of what I've got and I'll set it to 100%. So now he's going out. So we've also got our monster layer, or mutant I think it was called. And I can just search for exactly the same thing in here. And pop gradient wipe onto him. Back to the grey solid. Back to effects and masks. Turn him on. Turn him off for the moment. And then we want to keyframe him going the other way. So I want this to be 0. And at the end point, I want this to be 100%. But if I turn them both on now, they're both using the dark parts of the gradient to wipe on. So what that means is if I go to sort of that 50%, we're getting all of these transparent areas. And I think it'll look better if instead I invert the monster's gradient, so it's now wiping out the lighter parts of the image while it's wiping out his darker parts of the gradient, I should say. Does that make sense?
Well, I'm not sure why it didn't do that when it was already going to from 100% to 0%.
Me neither.
Oh.
But yeah, I mean, these are just sort of the tips and tricks you can use, but you can see I've got the different parts appearing in that way.
Okay.
So it's creating this cool transitioniness between the two of them, and that's a technical term. So he's then, if I start unsoloing things and play back what we've got, it's not bad. We've got a little bit of a jump in the background. I could put a fade on to cover that. But it's not. If I jump back to here, there's a couple of other things going on. She brightens up before she transitions. Mm-hmm. So I think we want to do that. The other thing is we're getting these blue lines and these red lines. Mm-hmm. Well, that is a really, really popular effect at the minute called chromatic aberration. And camera lenses have an inherent issue with light at the very edges of the frame. It's a flaw in a camera lens. But if you want to make something look real world, if you've got a 3D object, you can apply quick chromatic aberration, which just does that, just adds a little bit of red and blue to the fringes. Fortunately, there is a free effect from Plugin Everything called quick chromatic aberration. So I'm going to, now the way it works, I'm going to solo him again. And the way it works is it will create a lighter copy of the image with those edges. So I'm going to make sure he's selected and Control D to duplicate him. And then I'm going to add quick chromatic aberration to the top effect. And you see it's already made it brighter. Mm-hmm. And if I play with this, you can see I'm getting sort of these great big banding areas and it's twisting the image from that point. So we'll leave that at 0. And I think probably 10 is as far as we want to go. Mm-hmm. And about halfway through, I'll set a keyframe for that. And at the start, now in the original, it snaps on. But I think, seeing as we've got a little bit of control and we are doing it slightly differently, I want to fade it on. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to set this to 0. So what we get is a lightness appearing and a sort of a cool distortion-y thing happening too at the same time. We could even fade the layer up a bit, I suppose, if we wanted to.
But you did that on a second one.
I did that on a second one. If I turn off the lower layer, so it's just that one, it doesn't seem too bad. But the reason I did that is when I was playing around and testing it, if I add on the background again, you see, even though on black it looks like he's all there, he's not really all there.
No.
So if I pop in him there, we get a bit of that original. No idea why, especially as it appears fine on black. But there we go.
Okay.
So what we want to do now is also do the same for our monster layer. So I will go to the end of where we want the effect to happen. Control D to duplicate the layer. And then holding down the Alt key, I'll hit the right square bracket to trim the monster layer to just that. And if I do that, and then on the top layer, pop in quick chromatic aberration again. And this time we'll go in reverse order. So we'll set it as 0 for the end out point. And about halfway through, we'll set a 10. So we now unsolo everything, play it all back. Now I'm going to put in a fade on those upper layers because I don't like the jump it's doing. Cool. It's almost like a transporter effect now. Mm-hmm. But one thing was bothering me about this is we're getting close. And I think actually if I solo our original guy, we're getting the wipe. Mm-hmm. But when I go back to look at this frame, we've got a bit of her mouth and the side of her head there. So I think we need to go a bit further and do a displacement as well. And I think the best way to do that is with a very underused effect called Card Dance. And Card Dance splits up a layer into little cards. Go to my gradient layer and switch it to grey solid and effects and masks. And if I expand X position and choose intensity, you can see it's split the entire layer up into 24 rows and 12 columns. I can change those. And then it's used the intensity of the noise to displace each of those cards one way or the other.
Okay. Why have you got a little warning triangle?
It's probably because I'm in a 16-bit per channel comp, but it's only an 8-bit per channel effect.
Okay.
If I now mess with the multiplier, I can sort of reduce and increase the effect one way or the other. So I think without doing very much, and we can make this potentially a bit smaller, but we're getting that displacement-y thing going on. Now we'll set a multiplier keyframe there, and then we'll set this all the way down to 0. So we've done that over the duration of 1.5 seconds, because if you're going to put this effort into it, you may as well see it properly. But we could have made it much shorter, which would have got us closer to the Aespa look in the speed.
We're back because we've been tweaking it because it just wasn't quite right.
I thought it was fine. So the problem that we're having is if I solo out Guy and zoom in a bit, I thought this is sort of right, but as you're pointing out...
Yeah, it's just a bit too much. Like the whole thing is doing the displacement kind of thing, because we're just putting it over the whole thing.
But if we go and look at this one, it's only little bits of the image are actually displacing and the rest of it's staying put.
Yeah.
So, in that case, I think probably the best thing to do is if I take our guy and Control D to duplicate the layer, then on the lower layer, I'm going to disable Card Dance. So we can compare it, I could just delete it. If I hit U, I can have a look at the gradient wipe keyframes, and we'll set it there at 0%. If I go to about halfway and set it way higher, and then we'll leave it at that height. What do you think?
So you've done what?
I've moved the Card Dance onto its own separate layer for that guy, but so that it acts on less of him rather than moving whole big cards out, I've increased or I've shortened the time it takes for the gradient wipe to happen.
So there's only a bit of him left in its own, and that's what it's displacing.
Yeah. Is that better?
I think so.
Praise indeed.